In 2025, Trump ordered 2 panels honoring World War II soldiers removed. You can watch our video about their stories after this one through the link on screen at the end. But here's what you need to know. In summer 2025, the American Battle Monuments Commission quietly removed 2 panels from the cemetery's visitors center. One told the story of Technician 4th Class George Pruitt, who drowned saving a comrade 1 month after the war ended. The other explained how black soldiers faced segregation while fighting fascism, how men like 1st Sergeant Jefferson Wiggins and the 960th Quartermaster Service Company built the cemetery itself, digging graves by hand in frozen ground for soldiers they couldn't sit beside in life. If you'd like to support this channel and help me continue covering stories like this, consider becoming a YouTube member. The removal happened shortly after Trump's executive order eliminating diversity programs, and according to multiple Dutch reports, followed a Heritage Foundation complaint. The Dutch were outraged. 11 political parties demanded action. The mayor of Margraten formally requested their return. Veterans organizations condemned it. Historians spoke out. And the United States government's response? Send an ambassador to tell them they were all wrong. On November 17, 2025, the newly appointed U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands, Joseph Popolo Jr., visited Margraten. This could have been an opportunity to calm tensions, to listen to Dutch concerns, to acknowledge the significance these panels held for a country that has tended American graves with devotion for 80 years. Instead, Ambassador Popolo doubled down. When asked about the removal and the widespread criticism of Trump's policies, Popolo dismissed Dutch concerns as inappropriate and ill-informed. Let that sink in. The Dutch, who have adopted every single grave at Margraten since 1945, who passed this responsibility down through generations, who researched these soldiers' lives and fought for their stories to be told, were called ill-informed about their own cemetery by an American diplomat. Popolo didn't stop there. In social media posts following his visit, he defended the removal, claiming the panels were being refurbished and rotated, and that criticism of President Trump or the American Battle Monuments Commission was inappropriate. He suggested that anyone questioning the removal simply didn't understand how memorial exhibitions work. The message was clear. This wasn't a mistake to be corrected. This was policy to be defended. The Trump administration wasn't backing down. They were digging in, and that's when things escalated. 34 U.S. Democratic lawmakers wrote to the American Battle Monuments Commission, calling the removal an erasure of black history. But it wasn't just any letter, and the details matter. And then a Dutch television program decided they'd had enough. On Saturday evening, November 23, 2025, the Dutch television show Even Tot Higher, which translates to Up to Here, reinstalled the panels themselves. Not inside the visitors center, obviously. They couldn't access cemetery grounds, but on a public road directly outside the cemetery entrance, visible to anyone visiting Margraten. They created what they called an exhibition titled Maga Haten by Margraten, Hating MAGA at Margraten, referencing Trump's Make America Great Again slogan. The program's presenters, Niels van der Laan and Jeroen Woe, didn't just put up the 2 removed panels. They created additional displays highlighting what they described as discriminatory actions by the Trump administration, the dismissal of black generals, the removal of articles about non-white veterans from Defense Department websites, the systematic erasure of black military history from federal resources. The ceremony was attended by descendants of black American soldiers buried at Margraten. Margaret Pender, family of Willie F. James Jr.'s widow, was there. Maria and Rosie, other descendants, were given the honor of cutting the ribbon to officially open the exhibition. A trumpeter played taps as the original panels were unveiled. For a few hours Saturday evening, the stories of George Pruitt and Jefferson Wiggins were visible again at the cemetery they helped create. And then, overnight, police and military police ordered their removal. According to Dutch broadcaster BNN-Vara, which produces Even Tot Here, authorities showed up citing the obvious. You can't place things on someone else's property without permission. A police spokesperson confirmed that both Dutch police and military police oversaw the panel's removal, though they noted the program makers had intended to pack up the displays and did so voluntarily when asked. By Sunday morning, November 24th, everything was gone. The panels, the additional displays, all removed. The road looked like nothing had happened. But there was one thing authorities couldn't immediately remove. In a field next to the cemetery, with the farmer's permission, the program had arranged hay bales spelling out a name visible from above. Willie F. James, Jr. Private First Class Willie James was born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1920. He was 25 years old when he was killed on April 8, 1945, one day after performing extraordinary heroism during the Battle of Lippoldsberg, Germany. As lead scout for his platoon, James was the first to draw enemy fire. He was pinned down for over an hour, during which he observed enemy positions in detail. When he returned to his platoon, he helped work out a new plan of attack. Then he led a squad in the assault, designating targets as he advanced, until he was killed by machine gun fire while going to the aid of his fatally wounded platoon leader. Willie James was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, but not until 1997, 52 years after his death. In the 1990s, the U.S. Army commissioned a study that determined black soldiers had been systematically denied consideration for the Medal of Honor during World War II because of their race. The study identified 10 black Americans whose heroism met every criteria but had been overlooked. 7 of them, including Willie James, were finally recognized when President Bill Clinton presented their Medals of Honor at a White House ceremony in January 1997. James's widow, Valseni, received his medal more than 5 decades after he'd earned it. They are the first and only black Americans to receive the Medal of Honor for World War II service. Willie James is buried in Plot P, Row 9, Grave 9 at Netherlands American Cemetery. And for one weekend, his name was spelled out in hay bales large enough to be captured by satellite imagery, a tribute intended to appear on the next Google Maps update, so his name would be visible from space, even after everything else had been removed. The presenters said during the broadcast that the hay bales would remain until that satellite photo was taken. But social media reports from locals in Limburg tell a different story. The hay bales were removed or dispersed within days, likely under pressure, cited as safety concerns or zoning regulations. The view from space was fleeting. Willie James's name disappeared from that field as quickly as the panels disappeared from the visitors center. And that brings us to an important clarification, because there's been misinformation spreading online. You may see scattered reports claiming the panels have been restored or reinstated at Margraten. These reports are false. Some of the confusion stems from the even-taught hire stunt. People saw the television program's temporary installation and thought it was official. Some stems from deliberate spin by the American Battle Monuments Commission, which continues to claim the panels are merely out of rotation and implies they'll return. But credible Dutch sources, NRC, L1 News, Dutch Review, all confirm the same reality. The panels remain gone from the visitors center. The official stance has not changed. The American government's position is unchanged. Ambassador Popolo has not retracted his statement calling criticism ill-informed. The ABMC has not responded to Congress. And inside the cemetery, visitors still see a sanitized version of history where black soldiers' segregation and trauma simply don't exist. Benvara confirmed to Dutch media that the panels were always intended to be temporary and that they've been handed over to the Black Liberators Foundation, which researches black American soldiers' contributions during World War II. A spokesperson said the foundation and the broadcaster are working together to find a permanent location for the panels somewhere on Dutch soil, crucially, outside U.S. federal jurisdiction. And that detail changes everything, because what we're watching unfold isn't just the removal of 2 informational panels from a visitor's center, it's the creation of a permanent monument to governmental erasure. Think about what's happening here. Inside the cemetery gates, on American federal property, the official version of history is sanitized. No mention of segregation, no acknowledgement of the two-front war black soldiers fought, no recognition that the men who built the cemetery couldn't sit with the men they buried. That's the story the United States government has decided is appropriate for its commemorative mission. But just outside those gates, on Dutch soil where American executive orders hold no power, the true story is about to be permanently displayed. The panels that were deemed too divisive for federal property, the history that was classified as woke ideology, the facts that the Heritage Foundation complained about and Ambassador Popolo dismissed as ill-informed criticism. The Black Liberators Foundation is actively seeking a location. And given the Dutch response to this entire situation, 11 political parties demanding action, the mayor of Margraten personally appealing for restoration, veterans' organizations condemning the removal, a national television program staging a protest, it's not hard to imagine those panels finding a very prominent home, possibly visible from the cemetery entrance, possibly impossible for visitors to miss. A permanent reminder that the United States government chose to erase this history and that the Dutch refused to let it be forgotten. The irony would be devastating. American soldiers liberated the Netherlands from fascism. 80 years later, the Netherlands is preserving American history that America won't acknowledge. The country that was freed is now protecting the truth about the men who freed them, because their own government has classified that truth as divisive. Meanwhile, 34 members of the U.S. Congress are still waiting for a response to their November 24th letter demanding the American Battle Monuments Commission explain why the panels were removed and requesting their immediate restoration. November 24th, the day after the television stunt, the day after police cleared the roadside exhibition. The timing wasn't coincidental. The letter was led by Representative Emanuel Cleaver, a Democrat from Missouri. And Missouri matters here, because Willie F. James, Jr., whose name was spelled out in those hay bales, was born in Kansas City, Missouri. He's Kansas City's only Black Medal of Honor recipient. Cleaver represents Missouri's 5th Congressional District, which includes Kansas City. He wasn't just signing a letter as part of a partisan response. He was fighting for recognition of a hometown hero whose story was being erased. The letter wasn't polite. It was specific, and it asked the question the American Battle Monuments Commission had been avoiding. The lawmakers didn't just request restoration of the panels, they demanded to know whether the removal was a direct result of Trump's anti-DEI executive order. That's the question that matters, because if the ABMC says yes, they admit the removal was politically motivated, that acknowledging segregation is now classified as diversity ideology, that telling the truth about black soldiers' service violates federal policy. If they say no, they're lying to Congress, which carries its own consequences. Either way, they lose. So they've chosen option 3, silence. As of this recording, there is no public record of the American Battle Monuments Commission responding to this congressional inquiry, not to clarify their position, not to defend their actions, not even to acknowledge the letter exists. 34 members of Congress, representing millions of Americans, formally demanded answers about the erasure of black military history, and the agency responsible has simply refused to respond. The letter stated they were writing with great concern after learning the panels had been taken down in March 2025, shortly after Trump's inauguration. It noted that over 1 million African Americans fought in World War II, most in segregated units, willing to die for a country that did not provide them equal opportunities, services, or recognition. It pointed out that among the thousands buried at Margraten, 172 are black, and it characterized the removal as part of the Trump administration's months-long campaign against diversity initiatives and an effort to erase not only black history, but also our collective American history. The ABMC has maintained that one panel was simply rotated out as part of regular exhibition changes, and that the other was retired following an internal content review. They've insisted the removal had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with Trump's DEI executive order, nothing to do with the Heritage Foundation complaint. But they won't say that to Congress under oath. They won't put that claim in writing in response to a formal congressional inquiry, because if they lie to Congress and it's proven false, that's a crime. So instead, they say nothing. But the timeline tells a different story. Panels installed September 2024 under Biden. Trump takes office January 2025. Heritage Foundation files complaint about ABMC's DEI compliance March 2025. Panels disappear March 2025. Dutch outrage grows through summer and fall. Ambassador Popolo visits Margraten November 17th and calls criticism inappropriate and ill-informed. Television program stages protest November 23rd. Police remove panels within hours. Representative Cleaver sends Congressional letter November 24th demanding to know if removal was due to anti-DEI order. No response from ABMC. Panels transferred to Black Liberators Foundation. Foundation begins seeking permanent display location on Dutch soil, outside U.S. jurisdiction, and as of right now, there is still no plan to restore the panels inside the cemetery visitors center. The American Battle Monuments Commission continues to claim this was routine rotation. Ambassador Popolo continues to defend the removal. The Trump administration continues to characterize any criticism as inappropriate. The Dutch continue to call it erasure, and the families of the soldiers honored on those panels continue to grieve the removal of recognition that came far too late to begin with. What we're witnessing is a government so committed to erasing uncomfortable truths that it will insult its allies, ignore congressional oversight, and create an international incident rather than admit black soldiers faced segregation while fighting fascism. Think about what had to happen for us to reach this point. The American Battle Monuments Commission had to classify acknowledging racism as divisive ideology. The Heritage Foundation had to file a complaint arguing that factual panels about segregation violated Trump's executive order. The ABMC had to agree and remove the panels. Ambassador Popolo had to travel to Margraten and tell Dutch citizens, who have tended American graves with devotion for 80 years, that their concerns about erasing black history were ill-informed. The ABMC had to refuse to answer a congressional inquiry demanding to know if this was political, and authorities had to clear a roadside memorial within hours of it appearing. All of it, to avoid stating a simple historical fact. The United States military was segregated during World War II, and black soldiers faced discrimination while fighting for freedom abroad. Margaret Pender, speaking to Dutch media after learning about the removal, said it feels like everything black Americans stand for is being erased. Robert Gray, a retired Marine who has spent years researching Willie James's life and advocating for his recognition in Kansas City, called the removal a total dishonor to the African Americans who built most of Margraten Cemetery. These men, he said, went to Europe to liberate the continent from fascism and racism. They fought for racial equality in the United States, and now their stories are being systematically removed from the historical record by the government they served. The irony is devastating. Black soldiers faced segregation while fighting fascism. 80 years later, their government classifies acknowledging that segregation as divisive ideology. They dug graves for men who wouldn't sit beside them in life. 80 years later, panels telling that truth are deemed inappropriate for a commemorative mission. They fought 2 wars simultaneously, one against Nazi Germany, one against American racism. 80 years later, mentioning that Second War is considered too woke for federal property. And when Dutch citizens whose country was liberated by these soldiers tried to honor them with a temporary roadside display, police ordered it removed within hours. The message is unmistakable. These stories will not be told. This history will not be preserved. This truth is too uncomfortable to exist on federal ground. There's a link in the description. But here's what matters more than any of that. We're not forgetting. The Dutch families who have adopted and tended these graves for 80 years aren't forgetting. The descendants of these soldiers aren't forgetting. The historians who spent years uncovering these stories aren't forgetting. The 34 members of Congress demanding answers aren't forgetting. And neither are we. Jefferson Wiggins waited 65 years to speak about the trauma of building Margraten. When he finally told his story, he said he wanted people to know, wanted the men under his command remembered, wanted the truth preserved. He died in 2013, but his testimony led to those panels being installed. George Pruitt died trying to save a comrade 1 month after victory in Europe. He was awarded the Soldier's Medal posthumously. His story deserved to be told at the cemetery where he's buried. Willie James died going to the aid of his platoon leader. It took 52 years for him to receive the Medal of Honor he'd earned. His name deserves to be visible at Margraten, whether in a visitor's center panel or spelled out in hay bales large enough to see from space. The panels are gone from inside the cemetery. The roadside exhibition lasted only hours. The hay bales spelling Willie's name have been cleared from the field, but the graves remain. 172 Black Americans still rest at Margraten, their headstones still tended by Dutch families, who refuse to let them be forgotten. And their stories? The full truth of what they endured, what they accomplished, what they sacrificed. Those stories survive, despite every effort to erase them. Trump's administration can remove panels. The Heritage Foundation can file complaints. Police can clear roadside displays. But they cannot erase history. They can only reveal their fear of it. The link to my original video is in the description. Watch it. Share it. Make sure these names are remembered. George H. Pruitt, Jefferson Wiggins, Willie F. James Jr., and the 172 Black Liberators buried at Margraten, whose stories this administration has worked so hard to hide. They built that cemetery. They liberated that country. They earned their place in history. And no executive order, no Heritage Foundation complaint, no police action can take that away from them. We remember, and we're not done fighting. But here's what might be the most important part of this entire story. The Black Liberators Foundation is going to find a permanent home for those panels. Somewhere in Margraten, on Dutch soil, outside American jurisdiction, and when they do, something remarkable will exist. Visitors will be able to walk into the American cemetery and see the official version, the sanitized history where segregation isn't mentioned, where the two-front war is invisible, where black soldiers' specific trauma and heroism are erased in favor of generic commemoration. Then they'll be able to walk outside the gates and see the truth. The panels that were too divisive for federal property, the history that was classified as woke ideology, the facts that an American ambassador called ill-informed criticism. Two versions of history, feet apart. One controlled by a government afraid of uncomfortable truths. One protected by a country that refuses to forget the men who liberated them. And visitors will have to decide which version they believe. The official American narrative that pretends segregation didn't exist. Or the Dutch memorial that preserves the full truth, including the parts that make us uncomfortable. This isn't just about two panels anymore. It's about who controls history. It's about whether acknowledging racism is divisive or simply accurate. It's about whether the men who dug those graves while facing discrimination deserve to have that discrimination acknowledged, or whether their suffering should be erased for the comfort of people who never experienced it. The Trump administration has made its choice. Ambassador Popolo has made it clear where he stands. The American Battle Monuments Commission has chosen silence over accountability. But the Dutch have made their choice too, and Representative Cleaver has made his choice, and the Black Liberators Foundation has made their choice, and the descendants of these soldiers have made their choice. They're choosing truth. They're choosing memory. They're choosing to honor the full story of what these men endured and accomplished, not the sanitized version that makes no one uncomfortable. And when that permanent memorial opens, when visitors can see both versions side by side, it will stand as a testament to something profound, that the Netherlands remembers what America wants to forget, that allies sometimes have to preserve American history when America won't. That truth survives even when governments try to bury it. Jefferson Wiggins, George Pruitt, Willie James, and 172 Black Liberators are still buried at Margraten. Their graves are still tended by Dutch families. Their names are still carved in stone. And soon, their full story, the story the Trump administration tried to erase, will be permanently displayed where no American executive order can touch it. That's not defeat. That's victory.